Hello everyone! September just ended, so now it's time to go over the lengthy list of films I managed to cram in that I haven't yet talked about, starting with the original version of a movie I watched last September, 2007's Wreck. Manuela Belasco stars in this Spanish horror film as a reporter doing a story on local firemen. She and her cameraman join them on what should be a routine call to an apartment building to help an old woman, but after the woman attacks them in an incoherent rage, they find themselves sealed in the building with a virus by government order. Turns out the American remake, 2008's Quarantine, is not quite shot for shot, but definitely scene for scene. The similarities in writing and visuals are obvious. What's interesting is that though I was pretty sure I knew what was going to happen, that did not diminish the tension I felt. And there were some times when I would remember what was going to happen next, and then I was bracing myself, waiting for that next thing, and the suspense could be excruciating. Not everything's the same. There are a few details the US version added or changed, I would say to be more commercially appealing. And there were things about the Spanish version I preferred. I liked this main character better. She didn't come to annoy me like her American counterpart did. She also spoke very clear Spanish. My Spanish is so rusty it's embarrassing, but I found her relatively easy to understand. And there was also something nostalgic about it, because one of my teachers in high school was from Spain, from Valencia, and he had the same accent and used some of the same colloquial phrases that she does. I felt that the gore here was a little more toned down, and I appreciated that. I don't mind zombie stuff as long as it's not too chewy. I thought this had a convincing TV camera look, and the final segment seemed to unravel a little slower to its advantage. Either we got a longer view of some things, or I was bolder about looking at the screen this time. I was cringing, though. The whole night vision sequence is really creepy. Creepier than the American version. Movie number 2 is 1946's The Dark Mirror, a psychological noir that stars Olivia de Havilland in a dual role as twin sisters, one of whom is suspected of murder. Because none of the witnesses can tell the sisters apart, and they vouch for each other, neither one can be charged. Co-star Thomas Mitchell is great, as usual, playing the detective who fails to solve the crime. In his frustration, he asks psychiatrist Lou Ayres, who happens to specialize in twins, to study them and figure out which one is guilty. Ayres is also good here, although this did get me wondering, how come he always got cast as doctors? There's this, all those Dr. Kildare movies, Johnny Belinda. But this is essentially Olivia de Havilland's film. Often her scene partner is herself, which must have been a fun challenge. I'm a sucker for the double gimmick, and I'm impressed at how well they pulled it off. There was only one shot that was wonky. But as much as it draws your attention to what you see, identical faces, hairstyles, clothes, mannerisms, what's really striking is how de Havilland uses her voice to subtly distinguish the two characters. I always enjoy watching her act, whether her character is warm and kind, cold and calculating, vulnerable and afraid, or self-possessed and intimidating. What remains consistent in all those colorful variations is that smooth, musical, dynamic voice. She gets to do extra with it here, and it makes for a solid, fascinating film. Movie number 3 is a rewatch, something I've done a solo review and a mini review of, and mentioned a couple other times besides, 1982's Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. The difference this time is that I got to see it in the theater. When I found out there was going to be a special showing to celebrate the 40th anniversary, I rushed to tell my brother because it's one of his favorite movies, and we were able to go on Labor Day. And it was awesome! The crowd wasn't too big, and it was well behaved. There were a couple kids there who must not have seen the movie before because you could hear them gasp at certain plot twists, and that was fun. I was a trifle worried it wouldn't be as fresh because I had just seen the movie in February, but that was not an issue at all. What they showed was the director's cut, which I think, well, going into it I thought I hadn't seen it before, but now I'm not so sure. I will say that besides the clarification that the eager young cadet is Scotty's nephew, and the emotional scene where Scotty assures McCoy he knows he did everything he could, which is a good little arc for James Doohan, I don't find the extra bits add a whole lot to the experience, but either version is fine. I was just excited to see the movie on the big screen, now that I've gotten to the stage where I know it well enough to anticipate favorite lines, interactions, shots, sequences, etc. as they come, relishing the entire experience from start to finish. Movie number 4 is a viewer recommendation that I already had on my watch list, 1956's Patterns, a business ethics drama penned by Rod Serling. First, it was a teleplay that performed so well that they made a film the following year, with several cast members returning. Van Heflin stars in this version as the young, sort of, new addition to a big corporation in the city. The company is a tight ship run by Everett Sloane as the stiff, uncompromising boss. Right away, Van Heflin hits it off with Ed Begley's senior VP, who he's expecting to work alongside, unaware that he's actually been hired to replace him. It's an intense drama with a unique specialty for uncomfortable moments. Tempers rise and boil over, there's yelling and humiliation, and the onlooking employees, as well as the viewers, can't help squirming in their seats whenever someone is chewed out. Ugh, makes you want to stay out of the boardroom. Movie number 5 is a Japanese film directed by Akira Kurosawa that I've been wanting to see, 1950's Scandal. When a tabloid photographer snaps a suggestive picture of a famously private singer and a known artist, a fabricated article calling them lovers goes to print and becomes a national sensation. The mortifying piece hurts the subject's reputations, and the artist takes the tabloid to court in a desperate bid for justice. Toshiro Mifune is particularly attractive here as the artist, thoughtful, gentle, even tender. The lack of a certain wild ferocity makes this a different role from others I've seen him play. For Kurosawa as well, the material is a bit different, almost like his take on an Ozu story. Kurosawa's choices of framing, camera movement, etc. are as fascinating as ever, though I can see why this film is often overlooked compared to his more comprehensive works. I liked it. It's a contemporary setting, so it's naturally more appealing to me than his feudal films, and it deals with a subject that continues to be relevant, the battle between celebrities who want to maintain some privacy and the paparazzi who harass them. While I have learned to keep an eye on Mifune whenever he's on camera, I do think Takashi Shimura, as the impoverished attorney who offers his services, steals the spotlight. And on a separate note, I was surprised when the film showed Christmas and New Year's celebrations. We get a fully decorated tree, a joke about Santa Claus, Silent Night, and Auld Lang Syne sung in Japanese. Very unusual. I don't think of Japan as observing these Christian holidays and Western traditions around this time, but American presence was still strong in Tokyo in 1950, so I guess that explains it. Movie number 6 is 1939's The Return of Dr. X. A reporter, Wayne Morris, is fired when the corpse he discovered turns out not to have been a corpse at all. But the details aren't adding up, so he sets about uncovering what must surely be a foul plot. 1939 is held up as the golden age of Hollywood's golden year. When people talk about the great films of 1939, this is not typically one of them. But it sure is entertaining to see Humphrey Bogart in this bizarre getup, with the shock of white hair and the buzz-cut wig, I assume it's a wig, the spectacles, the white rabbit, the creepy, obsequious manner, and the pale, sweaty pallor. It's a film that Bogart, if he remembered it at all, probably wished would just disappear into oblivion once he became a superstar leading man a couple years later. But I don't know. His performance itself as the ghoulish heavy isn't that embarrassing. He does what the role required of him. I didn't remember until a few scenes in that The Return of Dr. X is actually a rough sequel, or more like a remake, of 1932's Dr. X with Lionel Atwill and Fay Wray, which I have reviewed. The two films have some traits in common, but the direction this one goes in is sufficiently different that it doesn't feel like déjà vu. It also features Dennis Morgan as a doctor who assists the reporter in his investigation a couple years before he too became a star, Rosemary Lane, and German-born Leah Leese. Number 7 is a 1996 TV movie and viewer recommendation, Panic in the Skies, in which a 747 en route to London from New York is struck by lightning shortly after takeoff, literally frying the cockpit. The head flight attendant, Kate Jackson, and a passenger with a secret, Ed Marinaro, must work together to keep everyone calm and take control of the plane. This is a fun one. Sure, it's light on special effects with a low-budget feel and a nice spread of cliches, goofs, unlikely scenarios, cheesy acting, and so on, but my mom and I enjoyed it. Of the plane disasters I've seen, I'd say it has the most in common with Airport 1975 in terms of scenario, but also because they both feature Eric Estrada, this time playing an action movie star who's not quite the hotshot he portrays on screen. Movie number 8 is 1938's Mad About Music, where Deanna Durbin plays an American girl attending boarding school in Switzerland who tells wild stories about a big game hunter father, when in reality her father is dead and her mother, Gail Patrick, is a movie star whose identity she has to keep secret. When a jealous classmate calls Durbin's bluff, Durbin ropes Herbert Marshall's visiting Englishman into posing as her dad. I had wanted to see this one for some time, mainly for that combination of Durbin and Marshall, and I just get such a kick out of seeing him in wacky situations and unusual pairings. The story has some annoying elements, what with the absurd lies and the mean girl stuff. Admittedly, it wasn't much of a movie until Marshall's unsuspecting composer in need of arrest showed up with his irascible assistant Arthur Treacher. It's not long before Marshall is won over by Durbin's charm, and then he's a total teddy bear, and it's so nice. The two actors have a lovely dynamic, as I'd expected they would, and everything turns out right in the end. Maybe too right to be believable, but hey, it's a feel-good movie. It's a showcase for Durbin's beautiful singing, too, of course, as well as another act that featured some serious harmonicas. Movie number 9 is 1955's House of Bamboo, directed by Samuel Fuller, in which a man working undercover sets out to take down a racketeering ring in Tokyo. I can't say I enjoyed this film much, though it wasn't bad. There wasn't really anyone I warmed up to, not that that's necessary. It was proudly filmed on location, yet compared to Japanese-made films I've seen that came out around the same time, it felt odd. It was also difficult for me to let go of my expectations, and this is entirely my fault. This movie had been on one of my lists for a year or two, and I decided now's the time, I'm going to order it. I did not do anything to refresh my memory, to find out what it was about. I knew before, but I forgot. So, for some reason, going into it, I thought it was going to be a black and white murder mystery, a noir or a whodunit set in Tokyo. That's not really what it is, and some of those things were absolutely wrong. It's adamantly in color, it doesn't focus on a detective, there's more romance than I had anticipated, and while it does open with a murder, that's not really the focus of the film, though I will say the movie does have some very good and creative kill scenes. It stars Robert Ryan playing a baddie with calm understatement, Robert Stack, who I found kind of a dull protagonist, and Shirley Yamaguchi, along with Cameron Mitchell and Brad Dexter. Both DeForest Kelley and Sesshu Hayakawa have significant supporting roles, though Kelley is uncredited and Hayakawa was dubbed by an American trying to sound like someone speaking English with a Japanese accent. Strange, considering Hayakawa could speak English just fine, had been a major, and I mean major, Hollywood heartthrob in the silent era, was an internationally known and respected actor, and gave an undubbed Academy Award-nominated performance in The Bridge on the River Kwai just 2 years later. Number 10 is another TV movie and another viewer recommendation, 1976's One of My Wives is Missing, which is a provocative title for a film in which a man on his honeymoon reports that his bride has disappeared. Days later, a woman shows up claiming to be his wife, but he insists he's never seen her before. James Franciscus is the man, Elizabeth Ashley is the woman, and Jack Klugman is the detective trying to figure out what's really going on. This is an interesting movie. You may think it's predictable, but then a twist will throw you off, and another, and another. It's got some great dialogue and a lot of levity, thanks to Klugman, whose exasperated Brooklyn transplant policeman steals the show. Milton Seltzer also makes a fine appearance. There are a few slow spots, the story felt somewhat familiar, and there were a couple points when I wanted to yell, "No, don't do that!" But Klugman's performance makes this a fun and intriguing ride. Movie number 11 is 1940's Vigil in the Night, which stars Carole Lombard as a saintly nurse who wants her younger sister, Anne Shirley, to join her in the profession. When Shirley makes a fatal error, Lombard takes the blame and the punishment. The stain on her record haunts her as she seeks work at another hospital, where she catches the attention of the talented surgeon, Brian Ahern. Throw a bus accident, a scandal, and an epidemic into the mix, and you have a pretty good film. It's a bit syrupy at times, so intent on its noble depiction of the nursing profession that you half expect Lombard's character to have a halo around her head, but it's a well-acted, well-made film that's worth watching. It was based on a book by A.J. Cronin, who also wrote The Citadel, a story about a young, dedicated doctor that was made into a film in 1938. Oh, and keep your eyes peeled here for a very young Peter Cushing. Movie number 12 was an impulse rental, 2022's The Outfit, a stylish crime drama set in 1950s Chicago, where Mark Rylance plays a mild-mannered British tailor, cutter, who lets the local mob use his shop as a drop-off. When the boss's son takes a bullet one night, he's reluctantly pulled into their business and forced to use his wits to survive. It was late bloomer Mark Rylance's face on the DVD cover that caught my eye, and he's great here, of course. This was a COVID production, and it plays it safe by occurring in one location and having a smallish cast that includes Dylan O'Brien, Johnny Flynn, Simon Russell Beale, and Zoe Deutsch. It's a nice-looking film with a vintage aesthetic and special attention given to textiles and accoutrements of the trade. The script is clever, with tricky maneuvers and one or two gotcha moments. Maybe it's a tad too clever, because I could see it was up to something and started trying to anticipate the twists instead of just letting them come. It does get pretty dark, even a little gory, but there's also quite a bit of time where characters just talk. It was a good movie, and I liked it. I'm just not sure how much I'll remember it after some time goes by. Movie number 13 is 1949's The Hidden Room, also known as Obsession, a British thriller in which Robert Newton plays a doctor fed up with his wife's cheating. Rather than divorce her, he decides to get revenge by kidnapping and then killing her latest lover. His murderous plan is thorough, including his own development of the acid in which he'll dissolve the body. Ew. But there's a Scotland Yard superintendent, Naunton Wayne, who's taken on the missing person case, and he's awfully persistent. One might easily describe this suspenseful film, directed by Edward Dmytryk, as Hitchcockian. What makes it especially interesting is that some things don't play out the way you'd expect. For instance, the doctor keeps the boyfriend, Phil Brown, locked up, but he doesn't torture him. On the contrary, he makes sure he's not hungry and not bored, and their interactions are almost convivial, despite the omnipresent tension between them. You end up feeling sympathy for both of these men, and the wife, played by Sally Gray, is so awful that, well, you don't want anybody to be killed, but it would be nice if she learned a lesson, you know? Movie number 14 is 1985's Zone Troopers, in which 4 U.S. soldiers wandering behind enemy lines in Italy 1944 come across a crashed spaceship and its lone survivor. Some of you may remember last year I talked about cowboys and aliens, and I was really taken with the idea of mixing genres like that, of having characters in a certain genre, a certain time period, face monsters we associate with contemporary films. Well, conceptually, Zone Troopers is exactly the kind of thing I had in mind, a mashup of World War II movie and Alien movie. With regard to execution, though, this isn't quite how I would have chosen to do it. It isn't quite the movie I was looking for. It's fine. The movie, which was made in Italy, has a cult following, and I can see why it hits the spot for some people, especially a certain nostalgic demographic. For some reason, though, I never really got into it. Maybe because the last World War II thing I watched was Band of Brothers, which certainly would put something like Zone Troopers at a disadvantage, but also I was hoping it would be at least a little spooky, and it isn't. It is super corny. It doesn't feel authentically 1944 by any stretch of the imagination. Our heroes are so goofy at times that I couldn't help thinking, these guys would never win the war. But fortunately for them, the Nazis here are cartoonish baboons. Many of its elements seem lifted from previous films, and the music unabashedly rips off In the Mood, Sing Sing Sing, and John Williams' Imperial March. However, taken in the right spirit, it's a wacky little what-if adventure. I like the trend of thinking it inspires, and how they deal with the whole "nobody's ever gonna believe this" problem. I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be taken as a love letter to old war movies, or a parody of them, but when I found out that director Danny Bilson and his co-writer Paul DeMeo were also the team that made, among other things, The Rocketeer, well, then it all made sense. They have a lot in common. Movie number 15 is 1955's Dementia, which is not to be confused with Francis Ford Coppola's 1963 horror thriller Dementia 13. Dementia is an experimental film made by John Parker, which shows a woman's disturbing experiences during one night on the town. Only 55 minutes long, it contains no dialogue, just music, including the talents of Marnie Nixon and Shorty Rogers, and the occasional sound of laughter. It's surreal and a little grotesque at times, never graphic, but sufficiently suggestive. It's not startling, like Luis Buñuel's Un Chien Andalou, the part with the eye, but it's undeniably bizarre, and you'll be more weirded out by it if, like me, you don't generally go for this kind of thing. Over the years, Dementia has proven to be an influential avant-garde work, but it's also the movie that's playing in the theater in 1958's The Blob. It has some great photography and unique choices that, combined, inspire a feeling of uneasiness from beginning to end. Two sequences stuck out to me the most. One's the part where the rich man gobbles up the fried chicken, and it's disgusting. I love Kentucky Fried Chicken and Bojangles, but this was just way too close. Ugh. The other's a part where someone's hand is sawn off. Again, not graphic, but suggestive. Black masked spectators look on, and the scene is appropriately backed by the sound of a violin bow scraping across the strings. It was a weird thing to watch after midnight. Movie number 16 is 2002's Dog Soldiers. The premise of this film, written and directed by Neil Marshall, is pretty simple. Soldiers on a training exercise in the Scottish woods encounter killer beasts that are half man, half wolf. For the most part, werewolf movies don't interest me, but I was intrigued by this concept. And while at first I wasn't sure if it was going to deliver, once the setup was taken care of and characters were introduced, basically from the time the cow hit the ground, it was on fire. The execution is great. It's fast-paced, scary, tense, exciting. There's compelling drama to ensure you care about the characters, and there's a little sprinkle of dry humor here and there to balance the tension. It's a fairly low-budget picture, but smart decisions were made to conceal that, especially regarding how much to show and for how long. If you show too much of your monster too soon, you risk dulling the mystery and the menace. This movie was wise to that. There were a couple stills I had seen beforehand that made the design appear kind of hokey, but that was not the case in the moment. These werewolves triggered some memories of my old Anubis nightmares. The film is definitely R-rated. There's a lot of swearing, though you might miss half of that due to accents and noise, and yep, it's got violence and gore, but Mom and I both thought it was quite good. And last one is another viewer recommendation, 1955's The Long Grey Line. This John Ford-directed biopic stars Tyrone Power as Marty Marr, an Irishman who spent 50 years at West Point, first as a waiter, then as an instructor. It's part comedy, part drama, downright tragic in some spots, highlighting events and personal relationships in Marr's life. Maureen O'Hara, who was Power's leading lady in The Black Swan 13 years prior, charmingly plays his Irish Colleen, and with this being a Ford film, it's no surprise to see Ward Bond and Harry Carey Jr., along with Donald Crisp, Robert Francis, and Betsy Palmer. In both material and sentiment, it put me in mind of Yankee Doodle Dandy and Goodbye, Mr. Chips, and Tyrone Power does a fine job playing his character at all ages. I don't think of him as being Irish, but he was one of a line of Irish actors, so no doubt he tapped into his history to find the accent. The service angle wasn't a reach either. Power joined the Marines in '42, piloting planes throughout the war and remaining in the reserves for the rest of his too short life. We do get to see Marty Marr grow old, and that's something that never happened to Power. He's 41 here, apparently healthy and nimble, yet just 3 years later, he suffered a fatal heart attack while rehearsing a sword fight on set. He was only 44. Fortunately for us, he left his mark in many a noteworthy film, and though he's often underrated as a dramatic actor, his lively, colorful, sensitive performance in this touching film is certainly one to be proud of. And that's it! Just a few movies. I hope you enjoyed this collection. If you have seen any of these films, go ahead and share your thoughts on them in the comments below, and I'll be back next week. Thanks for watching.